Efforts to protect college students from predatory for-profit universities have been dealt a blow under the Trump administration, according to the New York Times. Department of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos gutted a team at the Education Department responsible for investigating for-profit colleges. One target was DeVry University, which has 55 campuses across the country. Back in 2016, DeVry agreed to pay $100 million to settle a lawsuit that claimed that the university misled prospective students about job placement rates. Now, the investigation into DeVry has been halted. In August, Secretary DeVos tapped a former dean at DeVry to oversee the investigation team. That team was created in 2016 after a scandal at Corinthian colleges, which ran more than 100 for-profit schools in 25 states and collected more than $1.7 billion in federal student aid. Corinthian colleges suddenly closed in April of 2015, leaving 16,000 students without degrees, but thousands of dollars in student loans. Under President Obama, more than 32,000 students had their loans forgiven. In December, Secretary DeVos changed the student debt forgiveness policy, making it a case-by-case basis. Currently, college students carry nearly $1.5 trillion in loans, most of which is held by the federal government. Congressman John Garamendi is a Democrat from California's 3rd District. It's so nice to have you with us. And those are such depressing numbers across the board. Let's start talking about the investigation unit that has been decimated now by Secretary DeVos. And what's your take on all of that?
I think it's scandalous, because if you're not investigating scandals, they're going to continue. And thousands upon thousands of young men and women, and some older, that are going back to technical training schools are going to get ripped off.
So then what are the options? What can Congress do? Is the answer nothing?
This Congress, the answer, it won't do anything. They're in league with this entire privatization notion. And we don't expect to see much coming out of Congress.
So then what, does it now turn to states or to step in and create something that can actually assess and look into fraud and help students who feel like they've been victims of fraud?
Well, that's where we're going to be for the next couple of years, until this administration ends and maybe until Congress changes. But the reality is the states do have power. They should have the power.
$1.5 trillion is the total amount of student debt. 70% of students in this country owe an average of $38,000 apiece. This then goes on to mean that if you have that kind of debt, you're not buying a house, you're probably delaying marriage, et cetera, et cetera. Betsy DeVos has said, listen, we can't just discharge that debt because we need to protect taxpayers. Does she have a point there?
No, she does not.
Don't taxpayers pick up the bill?
The taxpayers are already picking up the bill in 2 different ways. One you just described. It is the delay of entering the economy, because you got to pay off the student bill. You can go bankrupt and pay off and have your credit cards obligations discharged. But under the current law, you cannot go bankrupt and have your student loans discharged. They ought to be able to do so. Yes, you do owe money to the federal government. The federal government has decided that it is part of this rip-off program.
So to what degree could free college be a solution to this?
Well, you take a look at history. You go back to California in the 50s and 60s. It was essentially higher education, and community colleges were free. I was in the schools at the time. It was less than $100 a year. It was the notion that education was a public good, and that the society should provide the funding for the educational system. That's long gone now. Can we go back to that? Of course we could. How does it cost? I don't know, 50, 60, 70 billion dollars a year. Is it worth doing? Well, it's a good argument, and you need to look at it for the economic growth of the nation. You need to look at it for a well-educated workforce in the future, and is it worth $50 to $70 billion a year to make that happen, so that everybody can go to a community college or a 4-year college without tuition? I'll tell you where I am. Spend your money on educating your society. And here's where this administration is failing the public, failing this nation, and failing the future economy by not clamping down on what is a known problem all across this nation. That is the private, for-profit universities and schools ripping off students, not providing the quality education, and leaving those students with a huge impossible debt.
Congressman John Garamendi, nice to have you. Thanks for talking with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
When we return.